Yeah, excited about this time of year. We actually start practice tomorrow. The NCAA allows you to start 6 weeks before your first game. So first game is November 5th. Back it up 6 weeks. That's tomorrow. So we'll be on the court tomorrow morning, continuing our process that we've already been working really hard on all summer and early fall. Excited about the fact that we've got really good momentum right now within our program. Our guys did a great job at the end of the year winning our last 5 games. They came back in the spring with a really workmanlike approach with the 9 returning guys, if you count Andrew and Brock. Their approach has been phenomenal towards work and towards helping each other get better. Made some additions to our program that we're really excited about, both from a player standpoint and also from a staff standpoint. And then we spent a lot of time just trying to get connected around the how of what goes into winning so that now when we start the season in 6 weeks, we can go and execute that. Culturally, our emphasis as we start practice is, 2 of our cultural principles that are as important as anything, competing forever and getting past hard. Anything that you do in life that's worth doing is going to be hard. And I think for our guys, embracing that fact and then going and attacking it and doing it together. There's always got to be a reason why, and that why is really powerful if it's a group thing, if it's a together thing, and that's the power of team sports. Obviously, practice is all about us building habits, building championship habits. Got a big saying in our practice gym as you walk up the stairs. It says, first we make our habits, then our habits make us. And we don't play for 6 weeks, so we have a lot of time before we have a public display of those habits. But obviously every day is a day we need to take advantage of in building habits. We want to set a standard as a team for what we're about, regardless of the circumstance and even regardless of the opponent. I think that's one thing that clearly all the best teams have in common, because the level of play of the opponent may go up and down, but who we are has to stay the same. And that starts with our energy, what we call juice as a program. Our guys have done a really good job of that so far this spring and summer and early fall, but obviously going into the season, that's the most important time.
Questions? Raise your hand, please.
You got anybody can shoot?
Yeah, I actually think this will be our best shooting team that we've had. The guys that we have coming back from last year, we have some guys that made some shots. But believe it or not, Kirk, we actually made more threes than anyone in the Big 12. And we have, obviously, Jace Febris coming back, who we think is as good a shooter as there is in the league. And Courtney Ramey, a guy who made a lot of shots as a freshman. Matt's a guy who improved his shooting percentage from outside by 4 percentage points from his freshman year to his sophomore year. If he can do that again, he becomes a good shooter. Kamaka Hep is a guy we think can make shots. So we have some guys coming back that we feel good about shooting-wise. It's not just about necessarily one guy, but we think we can make a lot of shots. The key, obviously, is creating high-quality shots, because those are a lot easier to make, and that's one of our biggest keys on the offensive end.
We talked about this in the summertime, but do you still feel like Courtney and Matt are still making that upward trajectory of leadership and, keeping other guys accountable and all those things you wanted from those guys?
I do. I mean, the trajectory, unfortunately, is never a linear trajectory. So it's not like there's never a step back, but I think there's been a lot more steps forward than steps back. Those two are as different as night and day, but they both have the capability to be strong leaders on our team, and they're both going to have the ball in their hands a lot. They're both going to be in the game a lot. So their ability to affect positive change in their teammates is going to go a long way into how well we do as a team. And that's something that, as a leader, as a player, you either take full ownership of or you don't. So our job as coaches is to put them in that position, and then their job is to really sink their teeth into it.
This is your first time without Kerwin. I'm curious how that's kind of changed some things in the program first, and then I have one more.
Well, I mean, obviously, last year he truly had some ups and downs. I think that North Carolina game that he played, was as good of a performance of a guy that I've coached in a long, long time. But he had some challenging times as well, and obviously we played 5 big games at the end of the year without him, and he wasn't in a starting lineup even after that. So in some ways our guys learned to play during that stretch without him being on the floor. I think the bigger key, as a team, whenever you lose guys and you bring new guys in, is shaping your new identity that's a shared identity. One of the things that our guys have been doing that we've really tried to promote is spending a lot of time talking amongst players only about what they're about. And again, that's only as strong as your leadership is. Snoop had a strong personality. Dylan did as well. So when you take them out and you add some new guys in, it's a new blend, a new chemistry. But I like the way that our guys are interacting with each other and getting along. And it'll be interesting once we get into practice and we're there every day with them to see how that evolves.
And then second, that you mentioned that identity. You've gone Jarrett to Mo to Jackson with first-round draft picks. Who's the big? Who's the guy that comes next?
That's a great question. I wouldn't have necessarily said Jackson at this time last year, although we knew his potential was phenomenal. We just didn't know that he would get better faster than anyone in the history of basketball. And that's a testament to him and the work that he put in. I don't know that there's necessarily one guy. We definitely have some young guys with some major potential. But with Jackson, there was just a kind of a combination of factors that allowed him to take off. Will Baker and Kai Jones are both young bigs that have shown real signs of growth and improvement. Their games are very, very different than Jackson. They're different from each other. Jericho's had a really strong summer. Royce Ham is continuing to gain maturity and sturdiness as a player. So those guys are all going to be battling it out, to play. Kai won't necessarily play, I don't think, a lot of 5, but those other 3 will. And then you can maybe play 2 of them together. So Jericho particularly has taken some real steps as of late and some major steps as a person with his personal growth that we're hoping really translated into him being more aggressive and asserting himself more in the game.
You kind of answered my question about the front court maybe being a little bit more unsettled from a starting projection standpoint, but how does that change what you guys do offensively and defensively, that you don't have a low block big, but also a guy like Jackson, so much pick and roll with him and being a focal point of the offense?
Well, we talked about Jarrett, Mo, and Jackson. Those guys were all great players at the 5 spot, but they also were very, very different from each other in terms of their strengths. So we tried to center what we were doing around those guys' strengths and the strengths of their teammates. Interestingly enough, Jarrett popped in the other day into Cooley, and his maturity and growth was just unbelievable. And on one hand, 90% of me felt just so overwhelmingly happy to see him, really as a grown man now. Then there's that 10% of me that said, if this was the 80s, he'd be a senior right now. And those other guys would also still be in the program. But, we're still in the process of really understanding what those guys' strengths are. I think we understand our guards' strengths for sure, that the guys that are returning, coming back. Andrew's a little bit of an unknown just because he hasn't played a lot, but he's, we're planning on him, playing, and he's been phenomenal with his approach and his dedication to continuing to work even when the circumstances weren't ideal for him. I mean, he spent probably about half of the last 3 months, with a PICC line in his arm, and that didn't slow him down much in terms of being in the gym and training and working, being a great voice on the floor for his teammates. And now that treatment is over, so he can go full steam ahead at continuing to improve his body, get his body back to the strength that he wants it to be at. But it's definitely still evolving, Dustin, with the bigs. And, Jericho's a guy that obviously has shown a lot of flashes and potential in the past. He's getting slowly but surely more of a feel and understanding of little things on the floor, like when to slip out of a pick and roll. Jackson was so good at that naturally. Jericho's getting better at those things. So I think he can hopefully be more and more of a focal point.
Shaka, just from the standpoint of, having guys, you mentioned Royce and then, Kamaka and Gerald coming back. When you've got guys that are in your program 2 or 3 years and you can look kind of year over year at guys improving, how much does that change the dynamic when you're not having so much roster turnover?
Yeah, I mean, in our sport, everybody talks about getting old, and that's, it's a cliche, but it's so very true, especially when you watch the NCAA tournament at the end of the year. I wouldn't necessarily say we're old yet, but we're older and we're more experienced than we were. We have a good core group of guys that have been here for a year or two that have gained a ton of experience, both individually and collectively, and that experience has come through, success, and it's also come through, times where we've come up short, again, as a team and also individually. So I think the two guys you mentioned, Kamaka and Gerald, are ready to take a jump, but they're going to have to demonstrate and prove over the course of the next 6 weeks exactly where they stand, in the pecking order of our team from a playing time standpoint and a role standpoint. Our focus as coaches is to coach these guys on what they can become on November 5th and moving forward, not necessarily what they have been in the past. But all we have to go on is, what they do in practice today. And so we will definitely be excited to see, what those guys can do once we get in there on a daily basis.
Last year during the NIT, you kind of spoke about how the guys were playing for pride, and then you had about 7 months to figure out how to get them to play for pride on a consistent basis. Mm-hmm. How have you, sort of used what you did last year late in that NIT to sort of inform this season going forward?
Well, we actually spent a lot of time in the spring talking about that stretch of our season, and instead of me lecturing to the guys, it was really trying to get them to pull out what were the common themes during that time that allowed us to win 5 games, win an NIT championship. And they did a good job of, really pulling out the things that I would have pulled out. And the first thing that they pinpointed was that was the most player-driven segment of our season. And it's a lesson for me as a coach. So obviously what we're trying to do is gain consistency in that way. It's easier to do that over 3 weeks than it is over 5 months. Another thing they pulled out of it was being able to strike the balance between having a healthy respect for the opponent but also expecting to win. And that is, unbelievably critical for any team. But, for our team, when our guys go out there on the floor, we say all the time, hey, expect to win, but also expect to do what goes into winning because it's not just going to happen for you. So that was something that came out of that. And then I think probably the biggest thing is they felt a sense of camaraderie and purpose to play for each other. And that allowed them to practice and enjoy what they were doing late in the year. That allowed them to, really gain an appreciation for the little things that we did, whether it was on or off the court. So, the key, again, is carrying that over consistently over the course of a whole season, knowing that there's still going to be ups and downs. I don't know. I guess 1976 was the last undefeated team in college basketball. There's going to be times where, you come up short, but that doesn't mean that you can't continue moving forward in those areas.
In the short time he's been here, what have been some of the impacts that Coach Yaklich has made, and how has he really helped this team out over the summer?
Yeah, we're super excited about the staff additions of Luke Yaklich and Andrea Hootie. One of the things you do when you're putting together a staff and hire new positions, you just want to hire people that are truly experts in their particular area. And for Luke, he's done a phenomenal job before he got to Texas, and since his first day here, coaching defense, and he has a passion for it. It's something that he goes to bed thinking about. It's something that he wakes up thinking about. His energy level is such that you're never going to find anyone that's more motivated than him. So obviously the challenge is taking that and putting it in the players. But I'll tell you, in the short time he's been here, he's done a phenomenal job of that, and really excited about, again, us being able to be on the court with our guys almost every day, starting tomorrow, and the impact that he can make there. And then Andrea Hootie, her background speaks for itself, and it's been quite an adjustment for our players because her philosophy towards strength training is very, very different than what our guys have done in the past. It's kind of like coaching basketball. There's different ways to be successful, but she has her way, and it's worked for people she's worked with in the past, and we're super excited to have her here. Our guys have done a good job jumping in with both feet and doing what she's asked them to do.
That's actually kind of what I wanted to ask. I mean, to hear Kansas fans tell it, you almost stole Bill Self himself, right? Because the strength coach was so important to them. I mean, but we've seen with football what Yancey, what a good strength coach can do. I mean, what is she doing that is revolutionary or redefining the wheel or whatever?
Well, I mean, she views her job as she's in charge of what she would call performance. So she just wants to do everything in her power, whether it's in the weight room or outside the weight room, to help our guys perform better. And, obviously what goes into that is largely physical, but it's not just physical. There's a mental and emotional component to it. And obviously we're all going to work together on that, but she has a way with these guys at really boiling down to the smallest detail how they can be a little bit better, whether it's their running stride or whether it's technique with something in the weight room or the way that they leave the floor when they're jumping to grab a ball. She's very, very good with the details. Again, her philosophy is much different than what our guys have trained in the past. It's more of an Olympic lifting model. Again, my mindset has always been the strength coach is going to be a lot more of an expert on that kind of stuff. And she comes in here with phenomenal expertise. So we've said, hey, this is the time you have with these guys, attack it. She's done a phenomenal job. And, we're excited about getting started with this segment of our season. She's going to be an integral part of that.
And going back to Nick's question, the biggest thing about the NIT run was it seemed like they had a weight taken off their shoulders, right? But they're going to put the weight back on it because just the season's starting again. So how do you get that off?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's part of playing at this level. It's part of coaching at this level. I mean, you're going to have a level of expectations, and if you want to call it that, pressure. I woke up to a quote from a friend of mine from Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, and it's all about choosing your response because there is a space in between stimulus and response. So stuff like that always reminds you there's different definitions of pressure. We're playing and coaching basketball, but the phrase we used during the NIT, we used it some in the past with certain teams. It's definitely an emphasis moving forward with our team this year. Is aggressive, confident, and loose. And you have to play with a level of aggressiveness. Confidence comes from knowing that you've put in work, from a belief that you have in each other, and from being willing to just let it rip. And that's where the loose part comes in. If you hold on so tight that every ball has to go in or every play has to go perfectly, eventually, that's going to be counterproductive. Because basketball is a game of mistakes. Even winning those 5 games, we made plenty of mistakes. The goal is just to minimize those mistakes and then move on to the next play and be the very best you can be as a team and individually.
About 5 or 6 more minutes, Kirk, and then Dustin.
Shaka, how do you specifically handle the pressure, going into your 5th season and haven't won an NCAA tournament game yet?
I think it's a great question. Again, the biggest key for me, and it's the same as the stuff we ask our guys to do, is to immerse myself completely in the task at hand as opposed to the past and the future. I think there's something powerful about the moment that allows you to anchor yourself in whatever it is that you're trying to do, as opposed to creating a level of tension or anxiety in yourself about whatever happened in the past or what might happen in the future. Obviously, sometimes the biggest impediment to that it can be the mind, because, we all, wake up with different thoughts or think different things. But the reality is, it's pretty clear to me, and I think to our staff and our guys, what we need to do next. Now, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you do it. You have to put everything you have into it. But I guess to answer your question, just completely immersing myself and trying to get our guys and our staff to do the same in the moment and in the task at hand.
If you're making a checklist for things that you guys got to accomplish in these weeks leading up to the season, what are the couple things that top that list? And because when you hire a guy in Yaklich that is running the defense, do you have to spend more time on that now and kind of get the calls and things installed, or are you guys able to in the summer get a lot of that done?
We've got a good portion of it done. We got to spend a lot more time on it, but we dedicated a decent amount of time on defense this summer and just making sure that we could get any adjustments to our system in place for the most part before we got started with practice. There's a lot of things that are similar to what we have done. There are some elements, particularly terminology and the way that we guard certain screening actions that are different. And our guys have done a pretty good job picking that stuff up. In terms of what we want to get done over the course of the preseason, if you will, I think, it starts with establishing a standard of this is who we are and this is who we expect to be, regardless of two things: the circumstances that are outside of your control and the opponent. Because when you dwell on the circumstances or you focus too much on the opponent, you're going to be up and down. You're going to be inconsistent. And I think, again, if you look around at the best teams in any sport, they have a standard for this is how we play, this is how we act, this is how we interact with each other. When something doesn't go our way, this is how we respond. And that's regardless of what's said on the internet or what social media says. Again, easier said than done, but that's been a big emphasis and will continue to be emphasized a lot with our guys.
Any additional questions?
Shaka, you said just a minute ago, you said it's pretty clear to me and my staff what we need to do next. Can you define need to do next? What do you need to do this season?
What's that? What do we need to do?
What do you need to do? You followed up on Kirk's question where he was, and you said we know what we need to do next. What do you need to do next?
I think some of it we've already talked about. I think if I had to sum it up in one word, it would be consistency. Having a level of consistency in terms of the standard that we as coaches are able to get our players to hold themselves to. I think that the next thing to be to really focus on consistency in is our guys having a level of connectivity with each other where they're really playing for someone other than themselves. That's tough. That's really, really easy to say. It's hard to do, particularly in our sport because of certain factors, but it's what has to be done. And then I think what goes hand in hand with that is a willingness to put winning above everything else. And again, you have to be in the moment to do that. We say to our guys, what's important now, focusing on what's important now. But I think being more consistent in those areas is what we need to do, and that creates better results on the back end.
Jim, any follow-up?
Only that I don't hear a benchmark of what we need to do next is make the NCAA tournament. Is it as quantifiable as that for you?
Well, I mean, that's the goal every year, and not just to make it, but to advance. So that's what we're going after for sure. But again, the NCAA tournament's not till March. Today's September 23rd. Tomorrow, September 24th, we start practice. We'll be in the gym at 6:45 a.m. And under the philosophy of immersing yourself completely in the task at hand, if we can have a great day tomorrow, that's one small step towards what we want to do. And, you know, tomorrow we can't necessarily, you know, reach all of our goals for the season, but we can move towards that. But there's no question, you know, we want to go after that.
Go ahead.
That's one follow-up on the defense.
Yes.
With Luke's arrival and your commitment to defense as always, will fans and media see more of a Abbott style that maybe you would do at times?
You know, it's going to be interesting over the course of this next 6 weeks to find out how well our guys adapt to when we you know, put in our pressure defense. You know, it's definitely going to be a package of defense that we have in. It's not been the emphasis this summer, but it never really has been in the summer. Even when I was at VCU, it was more about building your half-court habits. But yeah, I think it depends on personnel. Looking back at last year, to be honest with you, when we did press, you know, the other team scored 0.59 points per possession, which is really good. So, you know, conventional wisdom says do it more. One thing we have to get better at when we do press is after whatever result occurs, whether it's a steal, whether it's making the other team miss, or even if they score, going on the other end and scoring on the next possession. That's an important component of it psychologically, because you could force a turnover, but if you don't turn it into points, it's almost demoralizing. So those are things that we'll focus on over the course of the next 6 weeks, but I do think it can be a weapon for us for sure.
Last one to Dustin.
Matt's a guy that ever since he arrived, you guys have asked a lot of, and
Yep.
that's one of the reasons why he came to Texas. What do you think he learned from last season and reflecting over the summer, and do you think that he's ready to take that next step in becoming one of those veteran guards in the Big 12 that you can depend on?
Well, I mean, it's nice to know going into the season that, you know, we have a junior point guard that's started 71 out of 71 games, has a ton of great experience. We have a sophomore point guard who was a starter the last part of the season and, you know, played, you know, in certain games as well as anybody on our team in the last, you know, third or half of the year. So it's nice to have the ball in those guys' hands and not someone that necessarily has to learn from scratch on the job. Now, those guys still have to learn. Those guys still have to get better. They have to lead. They have to be, probably most importantly, as good of a two-headed monster as they can be. If you add up the sum of their parts, I think we can be pretty good. But if they can make their whole even better than that, that's how we can be a special team. And that's from the standpoint of how well they play on offense, on defense, and also how well they lead. But Matt, I think a big key with Matt is, you know, we want him to play with unbelievable confidence, but, you know, for the time being, the last several months, the next 6 weeks, you know, we don't necessarily want him to be particularly comfortable. You know, he needs to be a little bit uncomfortable with getting outside of himself as a player, as a leader. That's how he's going to take that step from being a guy that I think's been pretty good for a couple years to being someone that can be excellent.
Thanks all.
Thank you, guys.